We're living in this age of wellness. It's everywhere. Meditation apps on our phones, mindfulness retreats. The search for meaning has become a deeply personal quest for millions of us. But here's the thing. Beneath that shiny surface of good vibes only, there's a darker current flowing. We're starting to uncover how this new wave of spirituality, which is supposed to heal, can actually create its own unique and pretty insidious brand of damage. It can build a system that encourages us to deny, to repress, and ultimately to just bypass our own pain. And that forces us to ask a really critical question. In our race to find well-being, have we accidentally built a whole new prison for the mind? In this explainer, we're going to investigate the dark corners of modern spirituality. And we're going to start where enlightenment is now so often bought and sold.
So our investigation begins where it seems like all modern quests do these days, the marketplace. And here, spirituality isn't really a path anymore. It's a product line. Ancient, sacred practices are being packaged, branded, and sold just like any other consumer good. And as we're about to see, that isn't just a metaphor. We're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry.
Yeah, you see that right, $4.5 trillion. That's the estimated value of the global wellness industry. Now, when you commodify spirituality on this kind of scale, its very nature changes, right? It becomes this sort of pick-and-mix buffet of feel-good techniques, all stripped of their original context, their ethics, their depth, and all in the service of the self.
And this whole phenomenon actually has a name, mindfulness. It was coined by psychotherapist Miles Neal, and it just perfectly describes the McDonaldization of these practices. They're standardized, they're stripped of their ethical roots, and they're served up as a quick fix for the stresses of modern life. It's basically capitalist spirituality.
And the way it's being applied, well, it tells the whole story. We've got mindfulness apps that promise instant calm. Corporations use it to try and squeeze more productivity out of their workers. In probably one of the most absurd examples, KFC, yes, that KFC, offered a meditation based on fried chicken. But the most chilling application? It's in the military, where mindfulness is literally being weaponized to help soldiers become more efficient killers. I mean, that is a complete perversion of a practice that's rooted in compassion.
So this massive commercialization, it really sets the stage for the first major psychological trap we're going to look at. A subtle but deeply damaging pattern of avoidance that experts call spiritual bypassing.
And the definition, when you hear it, is as simple as it is chilling. It's the act of using spiritual beliefs as a defense mechanism, a way to avoid confronting reality. So instead of actually processing difficult emotions, you just rise above them, covering up unresolved trauma with this veneer of enlightenment.
The best way to think about it is like this. You're just putting a fresh coat of paint on a cracked wall. Yeah, the surface looks pristine. It creates this illusion of peace and calm. But that underlying structural damage, the real psychological wounds, they remain completely untouched. And eventually those cracks always reappear.
We all know the language of bypassing, even if we don't recognize the term itself. We've all heard these phrases, and they're often delivered with the best of intentions, but they are the tools of emotional avoidance. They are platitudes that just shut down genuine feeling. They leave the person who is actually suffering feeling invalidated, isolated, and totally unheard.
And the distinction between a bypassing response and a healthy one is it's critical. A bypassing response rushes to slap on a spiritual band-aid. It invalidates the pain because it's in a hurry to get to a quick fix. But a trauma-informed response, it does the exact opposite. It creates space for the wound. It acknowledges that true healing is a slow, difficult process, not just an act of positive thinking.
Now, when this pattern of avoidance becomes a habit, when it gets really ingrained, it can curdle into something far more toxic. The very spiritual tools that were meant to dissolve the ego are instead hijacked by the ego. And this is the central, deeply troubling paradox of spiritual narcissism.
At this point, spirituality stops being about self-inquiry or doing the hard work of looking at your own shadow. Instead, it becomes a weapon for self-glorification. It becomes a status symbol. The ego just co-opts the language of enlightenment to reinforce its own sense of being better than everyone else, convincing itself that it's special.
And if you want to know what that sounds like, a study on spiritual superiority captured this mindset with this chillingly honest statement from a participant. It's a textbook example of what's called communal narcissism, where the person sees themselves as a guide for all the less evolved people out there, and their patience isn't a product of compassion, but of their own perceived superiority.
This stuff doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It really thrives in Western individualistic cultures, where enlightenment is framed not as a dissolution of the self, but as the ultimate personal accomplishment to be achieved. And this reframing, well, it makes spirituality the absolute perfect playground for a narcissistic ego.
Okay, so the goal of this investigation is not to just condemn spirituality. It's about trying to reclaim it from all these distortions. And the path forward, it requires discernment, it requires the courage to confront these toxic patterns head on. So the real question is, what should we actually be looking for?
These are the 4 big red flags of spiritual bypassing. You need to watch for anyone, a coach, a mentor, even a friend, who relentlessly pushes this kind of toxic positivity, who minimizes your pain, who rushes you to just move on, or who reframes legitimate harm as some kind of lesson from the universe. That isn't healing. It's a refusal to sit with the messy, uncomfortable reality of human pain.
Because the crucial distinction is this: authentic spirituality is about engagement, not escapism. True healing demands that we create space for our grief, for our anger, for our sadness. It requires trading that illusion of spiritual perfection for the messy reality of just being present. It invites us to turn toward life, not away from it.
And that really leaves us with a final and, I think, vital question for self-reflection. When you turn to your spiritual practices, are you using them to more deeply and honestly engage with your life in all its complexity? Or have they become a sophisticated shield, a comfortable means of escape from the hard, necessary work of just being human? The answer to that question, that's where the real journey begins.